At the beginning of January 2025, Karen Green from Washington, D.C. visited the Absam Community Museum in Austria. Karen traveled in the footsteps of her brother Paul's family, as Paul's wife's parents both lived in Absam for 4 years in the Wiesenhof Hotel, which was used as a camp for Jewish Holocaust survivors between 1945 and 1949. Sonia escaped death in hiding, while her husband Solomon survived a total of 10 concentration camps. Both came from Poland and got to know each other in Absam. Sonia is now 98 years old and lives in Long Island. Karen talks about what she learned from Sonia about life at the Wiesenhof.
I have spoken with Sonia about her experience here. And she was very fortunate in that her parents survived the war. And her recollection of being here at Wiesenhof was that the people who were living there were all in their late teens and early 20s, so young adults. And no one else had their parents survive. So her parents, she said, they were like the parents for everyone. And it was actually, in her recollection, an enjoyable time. She was here for 4 years because they were all recovering. They were all getting healthy once again after their traumatic experiences during the war. And her parents were like at a university when you have a dormitory and there's all the young people and one couple who are adults, and they are like the mentors, the teachers for the young people. And that was the experience of it. And she said that people often, they did many things together, and that the French, because this was a French, under the French, they ate well at Wiesenhof, and they had 3 good meals a day, and they got to do recreation in the area. And she met her future husband, Solomon Goldman, who was working for the Bricha. So she remembers it as a happy time in her life, a happy 4 years. And unlike many of the people who were going through this area as a way to get to Palestine, which was illegal at the time, and so they were at night going with truck convoys with people pretending to be soldiers and going to Italy and then going on to Palestine. Sonia had her parents here, and she was interested in going to Italy, but not to Palestine. So one day she got on the trucks and she went and she spent a day in Italy, but then she came back. I don't know if anyone else went to Italy and came back, but that was her experience.
In his book, Sunset Sunrise, Reflections of a Holocaust Survivor and Jewish Educator, Solomon Goldman writes in the chapter entitled Meeting Sonia, I met my wife Sonia in Innsbruck. She and her parents came to Wiesenhof a month before I arrived. We started dating after a few years. I had come from the concentration camp and had jaundice and problems with my ear. Sonia's parents were concerned about my health because I didn't look well. They liked me, but at first they were concerned about Sonia marrying me because they feared I was sick. I was also from a Hasidic area. In the area that Sonia came from, people spoke a highly literary Polish, and people looked down on us Polish Jews. It was the Litvaks versus the Polacks. Karen, what did he mean by that?
In Jewish culture, it's not only confined to the Polish and the Litvaks, but also the Austrian and German Jews who were very assimilated and upper middle class before the war, and what are called the Galicianers, who came from the Pale of Settlement, where Jews had to live, like the Ukraine and these different areas. There was like a big class difference between these groups of Jews who were more educated, better off, and those who, because of circumstances, were more like peasants because they were not allowed to have professions or get education. And even though this was just a question of luck, whether you were in an area where you were very poor and less educated. Sometimes they were very well educated as Jews, but they were not very well educated in the surrounding society. So there was tension between these groups of Jews, between the better off, better educated, and the less well off, less educated. So that's a lot of what that was about. The Jews were not homogeneous, and unfortunately, even among the Jews, these different attitudes or different circumstances followed them wherever they went. For example, my parents were from different backgrounds as Jews. My father's family was from Russia and Poland, and not allowed to own a business, not allowed to own property, very poor. And my mother's family was from Vienna and Lower Austria. And since the 1860s, they had permission to get an education or to own property. So between the late 1860s and the war, they became educated and then became better off. And even when they moved to America, my mother's family and my father's family, there was a little tension because of the differences in their circumstances and education level.
Karen, did Sonia say anything about the state of health of the Holocaust survivors at Wiesenhof?
She said that really the 4 years were a time where they could recover, that many of them were not healthy, they were underweight, they had, been hungry or starving, and that being at Wiesenhof was an opportunity not only mentally, but physically to recover their strength before they moved on to other countries.
Karen, do you think that the wonderful landscape around the Wiesenhof, today when we were there, dozens of people were out in the sun on their cross-country skis, was important for the way back to life for people like Sonia or Solomon, who were meant for death by the Germans and Austrians a short time before?
I think it's a beautiful setting, and they also recognized that it was a beautiful setting, and they did enjoy it to come back to life. Sonia actually said, which was very surprising to me, that these were some of the happiest years of her life. I think surviving and then being able to thrive and become healthy again in this setting. And also people were looking to their future. This was a place that both you have told me and Sonia has also told me that people were looking to move on to Palestine, to other countries, and start fresh. This was their beginning point, to start life over.
Solomon wrote a dissertation in the USA in 1978 entitled Education Among Jewish Displaced Persons, the Shirat Hapleta in Germany, 1945 till 1950. Is Jewish education also about working through the great differences between the survivors for a common future?
I can't say for certain because I don't know from them directly. I think that would be a great question to talk with Sonia about. What I can say is that Solomon dedicated his entire life to Jewish education, not only here with the residents of the displaced persons camps, but when he went to the United States, his entire career was Jewish education. He was very prominent. He was quite well known in the field of Jewish education. And went to a lot of conferences with other Jewish educators, helped develop curriculum. Also, there's a movement that is just as important now, decades later, which is called Jewish camping, which I know relates to living in a rural life. There's a feeling, and it has been shown to be true, that when Jewish children go to camp in the countryside with other Jewish children and they celebrate Shabbat together Friday night and Saturday, and they say prayers and they sing and they become very good friends with other Jewish children. And often they go to the same camp year after year after year. So that even if in their home they don't necessarily have a strong Jewish education at home, they get it in the summer through this Jewish camping. And I know that Solomon and Sonia and their two daughters, Aviva and Chedva, every summer they would go as a family because Solomon was a Jewish educator. They would go as a family to a Jewish camp year after year. And I think many Jewish children who have that experience, it's a very important experience for their identity and their Jewish knowledge. And so he was involved not only in Jewish education in synagogues and Jewish schools, but also in the summer in the Jewish camping movement.
Karen, can you explain in a few words what the basic ideas of Jewish education are?
From my perspective, and probably Jewish educators, maybe they have another idea, but because Jews are a minority wherever they live, for example, in the United States, they are just 2% of the population. In order to have a shared identity, Jewish education is important to know the religious tradition, to understand the culture, to keep the people from drifting away, sort of help them understand what it is to be Jewish. So even though naturally most Jews in most countries are fairly assimilated because they're a small minority, if they have a good Jewish education, they keep a tie to the people, to the Jewish people.
In the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, there you can find photos from Absam of the Wiesenhof, which Solomon Goldman made available. In these photos, we see him discussing with other survivors on a veranda of the hotel. Isn't conversation and discussion an essential part of the vitality of Judaism, especially in Jewish education?
I think that definitely what you say about discussion is very important because there is the Torah, which is the original religious text, but then there is the Talmud and the Haftorah, which are interpretations. And that's exactly it. Different rabbis, different religious scholars over hundreds and hundreds of years have debated and discussed, what does this passage of Torah mean? How should we in our current day interpret it? And so, yes, I think education, the discussion part is very important for the Jewish people. There is not just one way to look at anything. There's different interpretations that you think about together and decide really how you will view the text.
Today at the Wiesenhof, or where the Gnadenwalderhof once stood, there is no reminder that these are two places of Holocaust survivors. Even though over 50,000 people lived here between 1945 and 1949, often only very briefly. Karen, how important are places that commemorate the survivors?
I think places of memory are very important because it isn't just a story of death. It's also a story of survival, a story of resistance. And to document that, I definitely think that people who are coming to the Tyrol and to Innsbruck, they would this is not far away. And there's the museum here in Absam, and even the bus goes right by, and people would stop to see that. The idea of them training for their future life in Palestine, and also the idea of the people, that it was unreasonable that people were not allowed to go to Palestine. It was just one in a series of, such a long history of anti-Jewish sentiment, and that the Jews organized privately with the Bricha to smuggle their fellow Jews into Italy and then on to Palestine. It's an amazing story, and many, certainly not just an Austrian story, a Jewish story and a story of survival from war, genocide, ethnic conflict. This is meaningful to many, many cultures to see this.